Welcome to Esalen Live, where we chat with change agents and swim deep waters in an ongoing exploration of human potential. I'm Christine Chen. After a very inward year, what potential can be brought out, awakened to craft the next version of you? On Esalen Live today, Cassi Vieten. She's a licensed psychotherapist and mind-body medicine researcher. She's the executive director of the John W. Brick Mental Health Foundation, a scholar in residence at the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination at UCSD. She is also the author of Living Deeply, the Art and Science of Transformation in Everyday Life. Her spring workshop is filling up. It's called the Art of Futuremaking, and we have Cassi with us here. Hi, Cassi.
Hi, great to see you.
Great
It's
to
wonderful
see
to
you
be here.
too. Yeah, nice to see you. What exactly is future making? Fill us in.
Yeah, well, future making is actually a term that comes out of the futurist literature, which makes sense. What it is, you could look at the way our lives unfold as sort of being a pinball in a pinball machine. So, we have our upbringing, we have our genetics, we get shot out of the little tunnel, and then we just bounce along different things as our life happens, opportunities come, traumas come, and that's what determines where we go and who we are and what happens next.
Mm.
Future making is more being the author of your future and being able to say, wait a minute, if I could see where I want to be 20 years in the future, 10 years in the future, 3 years in the future, what conditions would I have to create in my life to make that happen? What pathways might I go through? And you can even give yourself the perspective of the future, looking back and say, how did I get here? And then reverse design what your activities will be. So that's on an individual level. And of course, there's future making on a global and societal level. Science fiction authors and people who have done creative television and movies about what the future might be like. You can imagine a dystopian future, you can imagine a utopian future, or something in between. But it's a way for us to experiment with what might happen if this happened, what might happen if that happened.
I love that. Hey, if you're just joining us on Facebook Live here, we want to make sure that you know that we are with Cassi Vieten. She's a mind-body medicine researcher talking to us about the art of future making. And if you have any questions, just slide them into the comments and send her some love. So, Cassi, why are we the artists in all of this? Like sometimes we look externally saying like, how can you show me the future of who I am? We go to all these experts, but why are we the experts and the artists of our own destiny?
Yeah, well, in some ways you can play with the idea that time is sort of an illusion. And we could get into deep physics about that, but right now we'll stay in the storytelling metaphorical sense that in some ways, you could imagine as though the future already happened, or you can imagine that there are thousands or millions or infinite potential futures that already exist. And it's a way of finding one of those futures and following the breadcrumbs back. I like to say it's kind of like Hansel and Gretel in reverse. Instead of leaving breadcrumbs, you are leaving breadcrumbs from your future self and following those. And
Hmm.
so another way to talk about it is that when people begin to have an awakening in their lives, that maybe there's more to life than they thought there was, or their priorities might be out of order, or something like that. That first awakening is like waking up and being like, oh, I have a worldview, I have a perspective, and everything I experience, everything I perceive, and therefore how I react and behave is filtered through that worldview. And
Hmm.
it's almost like realizing I'm standing on a map and I can only see what I can see. But if I were to go up that mountain over there, I'd be able to see different things, or people who are in different places can see different things than I can. So you start to recognize that you're living on a map. Then you start to recognize, as you continue to practice spiritually or in whatever your secular transformative practice is, that you actually might be the one holding the map,
Hmm.
and that map is a construction. And so you can say, I'm not even sure I believe in this map that I was given by society, or, my parents or my original religion and things like that. I think I want to try a different map. So that's stage two. And then stage three is like, wait a minute, I could actually be a cartographer. I could make my map of reality in the future. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean in a in a superficial sense, like The Secret, like anything I focus on, I can manifest. If I think about a BMW enough, I can make one. It's not simple like that. It's more like, can I create the conditions under which what I foresee right now, what I want right now, is most likely to happen? There's one spiritual teacher that said, enlightenment or awakening is always an accident, but we can make ourselves more accident prone.
Hmm. Hmm. And I want to bring up a quote from your book. Transforming our consciousness is the most important work we can do. And the reason I wanted to bring this up here is to ask you this question, which is, um, why should we even want to do this? What's the
Yeah,
importance of doing this?
yeah. Well, most people who are seeking some sort of transformation are coming to Esalen. There are some people who come just because they are loving every single aspect of their lives and they just want to kind of make it even better, tune the Ferrari. They really want to just expand on the perfection of their lives. But most of us come to this work because there are aspects of our lives that we're not satisfied with. We don't like how we're acting. We're not sure we are in agreement with where we're going. We're not sure what our purpose is or our meaning, or we have relationships that are difficult or behaviors that are difficult, patterns. And so, one of the ways that we can work on these things, you can imagine as though there was this constellation of effects in our lives. And I want to work on my workplace. I want to work on my health. I want to work on my relationships. I want to work on this. These are all aspects of our lives that we could continually be on a self improvement treadmill forever, when there's a common pathway toward all of those, and that is your consciousness, or how you view the world, how you see things, how do you relate to your inner experience, what is your map of reality, what do you believe about the nature of things, how do you view the world, what worldview are you bringing? And in some ways, it's like turning the telescope,
Hmm.
turning the valve on the telescope on the front end so that everything else begins to come into focus all at once, as opposed to trying to address every single issue individually.
Mm. Well, let's put this quote up again. And if you're watching, I want you to weigh in on this on the chat. Why do you think that transforming our consciousness is the most important work we can do? How are you working on that? Just share. If you have any questions, please definitely put them in the chat for Cassi. Cassi, you also have one of the principles that you put in your book called Seeing with New Eyes. And you mentioned imagination a little bit earlier. How does our imagination work when it comes to crafting the next version of ourselves? You said we can imagine the future version of ourselves, but how does that work? Like, how would you guide us to that in this moment, maybe, and also in the workshop that's coming up?
Yeah, so this comes from a quote from Proust, who said, it's not about seeing new vistas, but seeing with new eyes. It's not seeking after new vistas, but being able to see with new eyes. And it goes back to this idea of if we can change our essential belief system, our essential map of the world, the way that we see ourselves, the way that we see how things work, that actually has this ripple effect on every single area of our lives. And so, in terms of using imagination, um, I'm the I'm a scholar in residence now at the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. And Arthur C. Clarke was most well known for 2001, but he also wrote tons of other science fiction novels that had multiple inventions in them that he imagined that later came to be true, that later came to be invented. So there's almost nothing that happens in human evolution, human progress, and in our own lives without having a seed of imagination first. We
Hmm.
imagine what if. We know from mind body medicine research that what we think and what we envision, what we visualize, how we see things affects our physical body. So when I am walking through the world and I feel like I am an agent in my own story, I have to defend myself. I have to acquire as much as I can. I need to work for accolades from the outside. You're sort of on that sort of shadow side of the hero's journey. I'll approach the world in a certain way and I'll experience certain levels of stress based on my interactions. Whereas if I'm approaching the world like, hey, I want love to be central in my world. I want my job to be helping others and creating beauty. these are my orienting principles now, as opposed to maybe more ego-driven principles and goal orientation, I will experience my world in a completely different way, and my entire spiritual, physical, biological system will respond to that different way of viewing the world. Less cortisol, increased vagal tone, differences in hormones, differences in immunity, differences in even the way my brain works. And so we do have the capacity to influence everything about ourselves and our lives through our imaginations.
Yeah, so the body responds where we can control our mind and take our
Mm-hmm.
mind. That's so fascinating. And, you mentioned a little earlier about our maps, like maybe this is the map that we've been given for our life, that we can change the map or explore a different territory. This brings me to another
Mm,
one of your principles, which is preparing the soil. You mentioned this as a principle of mapping our own terrain, preparing the soil for maybe a different map to explore. How
mm.
do maps differ from person to person? And is there a recommendation of how we should begin to prepare to explore?
Yeah, well, in terms of preparing the soil, this is what I like to say is creating the conditions under which our intention is most likely to manifest. And so, just like a garden, when we plant seeds, we don't plant seeds and then go crack them open and pull out the plant. That's not how it works. We plant seeds, we provide soil, we put nutrients in the soil, we have water, sunshine, stakes in the ground. All of those conditions are conditions that we can create in our lives. What are your stakes in the ground? What kinds of nutrients do you need? What kind of sunlight do you need? What kind of water in order to allow this potential plant to grow? And if you've ever been a gardener, you know that it doesn't always grow exactly how you wanted it to. Sometimes you're surprised. Sometimes it grows in a completely different way than you thought. So it's not like we get to control our futures. And I want to make that clear. It's not that we get to map our course. And then if things don't turn out exactly the way we wanted to, then we can feel upset again. It's more that we create the conditions, we set a strong intention, and then at the very same time, we surrender to the unfolding of how things are meant to grow. And half the time, things grow 10 times more rich and beautiful and meaningful than you would have ever envisioned from the beginning. So thank goodness you don't get to control your own future.
That's so true, right? The word unfolding is such a powerful one to allow it to unfold. A comment, kind of something you might want to comment on also, Cassie, from Joseph. If we don't learn to teach ourselves who we are, we still perpetually seek this information from others outside
Mm,
ourselves. This is
mm,
the inward, thank you, Joseph, by the way. This is the inward journey that you're talking about in terms of finding the map within and then letting yourself go on this journey.
mhm.
Those things related, Cassie?
Yeah, yeah. And I'd say sometimes these perspective shifting thought experiments are incredibly powerful in that domain. So, for example, one of the exercises we'll be working on in the workshop that comes primarily from my colleague Mike Sapiro is being able to make contact with an imagined future self, having conversations with that future self, and having the future self be able to speak back to you, in addition to you being able to, in essence, sort of time travel and go back and speak to your younger self. These thought experiments are important because we've all heard about, listen for the still small voice, listen for the guides, our higher self. But people don't talk quite as much about listening for your future self. And it's been
Oh, yeah.
amazing for us to discover what kind of wisdom that imagined future self has.
And then you also have this principle that you mentioned that life is practice, practice as life. And so, as I'm imagining, I'm even taking myself to my future self too, which is such an interesting
Mm,
feeling. But in this process, I imagine that this is challenging, that some traumas may come up,
mm,
a
mm,
lot of inquiry, but we just don't know what to expect when we go there. So, what are the kinds of things that we can do to keep ourselves safe, but still kind of peering over the edge and going in a direction that we hope and long to go for, but also want to
mhm.
keep our hearts safe?
Yeah, yeah. I've heard the transition in communities from talking about safe spaces to brave spaces. And so, what do we need to put into place to allow us to be in a brave space, be in a safe place? The very first one, and we do include this in the workshop, and is really this uh, ground grounding of self-compassion, grounding of self-love. And it's the kind of self-compassion and self-love that is not indulgent. It's not sort of a, I get to have everything I want. It's not narcissistic. It's not like, really, I just have to take care of myself, because just as much as we have to take care of ourselves, we have to also care for the people around us. It's a deeper kind of fierce and strong self-compassion and self-love, which both holds us in a deeply intimate and kind and compassionate space, as though we were sort of the same way that you want to be scaffolding around your child's life growing into the future. We want to be just as attentive to our own selves as we grow into the future, but
Mm.
also holding ourselves accountable to our principles, to our priorities. And when I say accountability, sometimes that can be translated into sort of a, hey, be accountable, get it together, meet your goals, finish your to-do list. Like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a much deeper accountability to your deepest purpose, your meaning. You could even call it your fate or your destiny, because every single one of us comes into this work with a very unique set of background, circumstances, resources, networks, and even our weaknesses, or so-called weaknesses, and our traumas are our toolkit. They are what
Mm.
make us maybe one of the only people in the world who can deliver or contribute a very specific thing to this world. So we review what is our treasure chest, and then using all of that wisdom and knowledge, even people who have been through terrible things, even people who have done terrible things, have a wisdom that they can bring forward in a way that no one else can, to heal, to help other people, to serve as an example. And then each of us has the same thing moving into the future, a completely unique pathway that can't be replicated by anyone else. So,
Mm.
you know, a lot of people in our workshops move from the idea of hunting for happiness, searching for peace, searching for contentment, to instead searching for, what am I meant to contribute in this world? What is my purpose? What is my meaning? And then the happiness or contentment or joy comes almost as a side effect of finding that pathway.
Yeah. I think that's the universe calling you, Cassie.
Yes, well, I have to say, I've got my daughter on the breakthrough on my phone, so I should have turned it completely off, but
Oh, no, it's okay. Daughters are important. It's interesting. I love that you bring in the idea that even what we would consider the broken pieces of our past
Mhm, mhm,
are contributors to a mosaic of the path that you are describing right here. We want to
mhm.
know you're with us with Cassi Vieten. She's going to be at Esalen in a couple of weeks, and she's talking about the art of future making. So, in the comments, share with us what's your hope for the future. I want to ask you too. Currently, you are researching mental health and the relationship with spirituality. Cassie, what have you
Mhm.
discovered?
Well, it's a big question, but what I can say is that through my work on spiritual competencies for mental health professionals, which comes out of a lot of the work at the Institute of Noetic Sciences and this work we did on transformation with Marilyn Schlitz and Tina Amarak in the book Living Deeply, many other things, we know that people's spiritual lives are very important to their mental health. Of the vast majority of people, when you ask them, what is your number one coping mechanism, or what is your number one guiding principle in your life, will say that it's something religious or spiritual. And it's interesting because mental health professionals in general are taught completely zero about consciousness, about spirituality. They're taught about emotions, they're taught about thinking processes, they're taught about behavior, brain processes. But really, this arena of spirituality or religion is left out of most assessment and mental health care. And so we really believe that it's important that this be trained in mental health professionals, that it be brought into the room, and that it be harnessed and utilized as part of people's recovery for mental health issues. I'm
Mm,
also the executive director of the John W. Brick Foundation, and our mission is to integrate holistic methods such as exercise, nutrition, and mind body practices into mental health care. So all of that work comes together in the notion that there is not only psychotherapy, there's not only medication, there's not only institutions, there's an entire universe of mental health promoting activities and practices out there, many of which are evidence-based, that can be accessed, can be used for free, that can take maybe even 20 to 30 minutes a day. And these things are not currently being integrated into prevention efforts or
mm.
treatment efforts. And we want to change the way the world treats mental health.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that. It is rising as a top of mind topic for so many experts across the world. And
Hmm.
especially after this pandemic, a spotlight has been shined very deeply into this space. So we
Mm,
definitely thank you for bringing that to the forefront of this conversation, too, which leads me to my last question here, which is in this pandemic, Cassie, I think a lot of things went dormant, right? We went inward.
mm,
We stopped doing a lot of things. But at the same time, it gave us an opportunity to start doing other things that
yeah.
would support our mental health. What did you observe as some of the top things that bubbled up during the pandemic that you think might last and bring new
Yeah.
attention to our overall well-being?
Yeah, I mean, I think that many, many, many people, not every single person, we want to be clear that some people had devastating losses of loved ones or of jobs and, things like that, that other people have been frontline workers. And so their lives didn't change. They didn't have a big pause, they had a big increase. And so those things are important. But this very large proportion of society stopped commuting, stopped running around like crazy. I mean, I myself at one point said, what was I doing? Getting up in the morning, getting dressed, running into the car, running in Starbucks, going to have meetings all day, commuting, parking, all of that stuff seems kind of crazy now. And so I really think we should not think about going back to normal and not even back to a new normal, which kind of speaks to let's put some new habit patterns, which kind of non-conscious patterns in place. But how about if we use this as an opportunity to recreate what we're up to? And I just, I think it's hard for me to imagine now flying across the country to give a half-hour talk, which I did several times a year. And so I invite people to ask themselves, what am I not going to go back to? What am I going to move forward to? And not going back to a new normal, but really creating a new extraordinary.
I love that. Well, if you want to spend some time with Cassie, coming up at Esalen is the workshop, The Art of Future Making, April 9th through 11th. And she is leading this with Michael Sapiro, who is a Buddhist monk and the host of a syndicated radio show exploring the furthest reaches of human potential. Cassie, it's been fantastic to chat with you and really explore
Thank
this
you. Thank you
topic.
for having me.
Yeah, you have me thinking a whole new way. So I really appreciate you. And I know our audiences did too. Cindy Welch Strube has this last comment. This is way nice to land on here, which she says, beautiful. So have a beautiful rest of the day.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it's such an opportunity to go hang out with someone like Cassie. So go do it, everybody. Have a beautiful day. Thank you so much for joining us. Cassie, thank you. We'll see you another time and
Thank
have a great time
you.
at Esalen. Yeah.
Take
Barbara,
care.
Alexandra, Cindy, thanks for the love. Beautiful day, everyone.